So as I said, our focus for today's session is on technology risks and resilience post-COVID-19. And we're going to be looking at just a brief introduction. Then we are going to look at trend analysis, looking at the different trends following what is happening currently in different organizations during the COVID-19 period. And we are having a lot of, quite a number of countries opening up. And then we're going to look at what does that mean for us from a technology side, IT risk side. And then we look at what does that mean for organizations, what are the mitigation methods that different organizations can adopt. So looking at the different trends that we are seeing in the industry, and this is all across Africa, and what different organizations, as we interact with them, one of the trends that we are seeing is phishing. And phishing is a type of attack where attackers use email as the attacking vector. And we are seeing a lot of phishing attacks targeting employees, because you agree with me that we have a lot of different, we have a lot of organizations from the remote working that they have been forced to adopt as a policy. Most of the organizations were not ready for this. So you find that as an organization, if you had not had policies, let's say, and a culture around security awareness for your employees, it's becoming one of the top targets for attackers out there. They're targeting employees, and as we continue, we will be looking at possibly how do we mitigate these kind of attacks. But phishing is one of those trends that we are seeing from an attack perspective. And the second one is remote access. This is quite interesting because we have a lot of different organizations that are being forced to work from home. And some of them have had to change their technology infrastructure to ensure that they're able to accommodate remote working environment. So what you realize is that we have got, if you have got employees from executives all the way to, let's say you have got intern, you have employees who are on contract, all these different employees are working from home. So again, from a technology risks and the adoption of the technology is that as an organization, you've had to make the decision of ensuring that these employees, your employees are able to, one, connect to your network remotely. And you again, organizations have had to ensure that the organizations, the employees are able to connect to the specific applications, could be on the cloud, or those applications could be sitting on your enterprise network within the organization. So these are again questions and adoptions, trends that we are seeing from remote access, and there are risks that again come with remote access as a trend that is currently affecting us during this remote working period. Now, the third one that we are seeing is malware distribution, and malware stands for malicious software. And malicious software is software that has been developed by malicious attackers, and they are malicious in nature. So by attackers, they develop software that is malicious in nature, and then they develop ways in which these malicious software can be pushed to users or can be pushed to organization networks and infrastructure with a goal of causing sabotage, fraud, stealing credentials. And although we have been seeing malicious software distribution in the past, which has been one of the top ways in which fraud has been implemented, or rather attackers have been targeting organizations, but we are seeing these on the rise for different organizations. So malware distribution is again on the rise, and attackers are getting very creative on these. We are seeing new strains of malware targeting different organizations. If you're in the financial sector, we have got malware that is specifically targeting financial institutions, with, of course, the intention of stealing or fraud. If you are in government, then and parastatals, again, the question is, What is the intention of malware? Is it for fraud? Is it sabotage to cause disruption of services? Is it to steal your IP theft? Do you have critical customer data on your databases? And how secure is it? So that again, that's something else that we will be looking at as we proceed. Another technology risk that we are seeing, and again, will be interesting to get your input on this. Sorry, as we continue, feel free to share your questions and again, share your inputs and comments. On the fourth one, this is risks from reduced monitoring. So most of the organizations, one of the risks that we've had in the past is a question of whether you are an IT manager or whether you are in risk or should you be in the information security team. The question is, what kind of visibility do we have on our environment? So this has been a concern even in the past. But if you think about it, with all your employees, if your organization has 100 employees and you have all those employees within the building, you feel a sense of visibility. So now think about the fact that all your employees are working from home, and the question again comes up is, how do we now have visibility and monitor the activities and even the technology interactions between the users and the technologies? Because you realize for different incidents that happen, it's always an interaction between a user and technology. So again, this is with a focus on BCP, which is Business Continuity Program. Monitoring, response capabilities should not get diluted. This should be a priority. The question again we have, and we're asking ourselves, and as different organizations in different sectors, is if you are in the service delivery, if you are in the financial sector, if you are in government, parastatal, what is the visibility that you have on your environment? And do you feel that there is monitoring? Do you feel you have monitoring capabilities to ensure that from a technology side, should there be a disruption on your technology, you'd have the capability to ensure continuity of the business? So that's another trend that we are seeing. Organizations are now getting concerned about where do we see it in terms of the ability of us as an organization to ensure that we have continuity from a business side. And then we have exploitation of new teleworking infrastructure. And what this means is that different organizations in the past, before COVID, had different ways in which they could access the infrastructure. For example, some of the different remote tools that are used by different organizations are the TeamViewer. Okay, we have got the likes of AnyDesk. Remember, our focus today is on the technology side and the fact that we are using this technology and the trends that have changed with the adoption of different technology trends during COVID. What is the impact that has on us as an organization? So those being some of the different remote tools that organizations have been using, what attackers are doing during this period is again wanting to exploit those existing remote tools that have been used by organizations. But interesting enough is that we have seen new teleworking infrastructure that attackers are now looking at and looking to exploit. Of course, we are all aware of the challenges that we had with remote connection tools like Zoom when COVID-19 early in the year. Zoom was in the rise, and again, questions arose in terms of how secure is the connection as you're using that as a platform. So again, those are questions again that different organizations are having. Again, the question is, how secure is my remote, my teleworking infrastructure? If I connect from home, how secure is the connection to my environment, my working environment? Is it possible for anyone to intercept and change the integrity of my data? Is it possible for someone to disrupt that session? in use. So again, these are the different questions and the trends that we having during this period. Again, just a recap on these: phishing, one of the trends that we are seeing; remote access, malware distribution, risks from reduced monitoring are on the rise, exploitation of new teleworking infrastructure. These are just some of the top trends that we are seeing from our analysis. So a bit of a dive into the exploitation of new teleworking infrastructure is that one, we have got different infrastructure that we are using. And if you'll agree with me that from your organizations, for all of us who are in this webinar today, you're either having very few employees on site, or you still haven't resumed, all your employees are working from home. So those are the different scenarios that we're looking at. But I think on average, most of the organizations still have majority of their employees and the staff working from home. So for you to access the different platforms, if you have a Navision, if you have a banking system, if you have email, all these different applications, there is a way in which the technology enablers within the organization have configured those applications for them to be accessed remotely by the staff of those different organizations. And one of the things that we are seeing in terms of exploitation is that attackers are doing a reconnaissance. A reconnaissance is just an understanding, mapping out. If you're a financial institution, they will go online, they will look for what are the different, if I search for your domain, it's one of the first things that attackers do. They will go online, they will look for your domain, and then if you have abc.co.bw, if you have abc.co.something, your domain, they will search for it, and that will be in an attempt to recon and map out all the different infrastructure that we are seeing, that you as an organization have. Now, once they understand this, depending on the specific product that you have, let's say you have Fortinet, Palo Alto, PulseSecure, depending on the specific VPN product that you as an organization are using, then they will want to check and do an analysis of the threats that are associated with that specific virtual private network product, VPN. So one of the things that as an organization that our focus should be is as we adopt remote infrastructure, teleworking infrastructure to enable staff to connect to our business applications, again, the question comes in is, how secure are the connections? And one of the one of the ways in which we can ensure that we have a second layer of protection is to turn on two-factor authentication, okay, which we're going to get into. But what that means is if you have your staff logging into email, if you have an email portal, ensure that you have got two-factor authentication besides the password, have something else that your staff can use, so that if the first layer, which is normally for most applications password, if the first layer is compromised, then it makes it more challenging for an attacker to compromise the second layer. So you'll find most of the two-factor authentication layers that you'll find is you enable an SMS code, for example, or you will have on an authentication app like Google Authenticator, which helps you to have a second layer. You log in using your username and password to whichever application that you have. But then besides that username and password, you have a code sent to your either application or text, and then you log in with that code, which means if attackers are doing a reconnaissance and looking for vulnerabilities on the different teleworking infrastructure, as they try to compromise the most basic authentication mechanism, which is username and password, then they find a second layer, which is a two-factor authentication. I believe the different organizations that are represented here. We have, you're either using Zoom, you're using Teams, you're using a specific communication platform to ensure that your different employees. We now have virtual meetings, which I think are very interesting because there are a lot of disruptions, but this has been the new norm. But again, as an organization, you have a specific platform that you're using. Again, the question is, how do we sensitize our staff so that we have a new culture? Because before we used to go to work 8 a.m., 9 a.m., and then we leave at 5. But with a new adoption, it means that attackers, it means that your staff are online all the time, which means that the attack service has been exposed, both for the user themselves and also as an organization. What we are seeing is that the attack surface is increasing. So we need to have a way in which we can sensitize our users and also put in controls from a technology side to reduce the risks and reduce the attack surface. So we did an analysis of the different ports that are open on different organizations, on different networks, just from the internet, based on the information that is available online. And we have a number of ports that when they are open, they increase your attack surface. So what you have on this slide is a list of different ports, that are highly exploitable by attackers. And the first one is Telnet. So Telnet is a service that enables technology, what do we call them? Managers. If you have technology like routers and switches, it helps administrators of those network infrastructure devices to connect to those devices and manage those devices. But Telnet is one of the most abused service, which if you still are using this service, the recommendation is for you to switch to a different service that can still help you to manage those devices. An example of such a service is SSH, Secure Shell, which ensures that as you are connecting to your devices, you're connecting via a secure channel. So we are still using a lot of organizations having Telnet as a service that runs on port 23. If you look at my bottom left, whose font is a bit small, but you see that port 23 that has been on the rise. So what does this mean? What this means is that with staff working from home and wanting to manage the different perimeter devices, some of which are firewalls, some of which are routers, some of which are switches. What this means is that we have all these different platforms and devices that are now open from outside. And let me say this. Good. So if you look at, this is a distribution of the different ports. And hopefully, I see Kachasa, apologies, we don't have Zambia here, but we can share statistics later on. But what you see on this slide is that for the different ports, when you look at this again, the question is, when I go back to my organization, the question is, what ports do we have open on the internet? Now, what this means is, if you have port 23 open on the internet, it means an attacker can look for this port. If they find it open, they'll try to do any username password combination. And remember, all this is automated. We have got bots, automated scripts that are running, not even humans trying to brute force being an attack where you try to do all these different combinations of a username and password until boom, you are into that device. So Telnet, if you have Telnet open on port 23 on your network device, could be your router, could be your switch, could be your firewall, what this means is that you might be compromised already. So this is one of those ports that you want to check on and close or restrict it to certain specific users. If you have an IT administrator, network administrator who is working from home, one of the ways is that you can restrict that port to a specific IP address, which is their public IP address from home. But if you are running 23, our recommendation is have this changed to 22, which is secure shell, which ensures that even that connection is secure. Port 21, you see we had 4,000 in Nigeria, 2,000 in Kenya, 749 in Uganda, and 261 ports on in Botswana. These are the different, this is the count of ports. Port 21 FTP that we found open on the internet. And I see Kombe asking, how do we scan perimeter devices for open ports like SSH or Telnet, and how do we mitigate these? Thank you for that question, Kombe. I'll just respond to that because it's in line with what I have on the screen. One of the things that you see that we can take home from this slide is one of the things that you can do right after today's webinar is go back to your environment and ask yourself, how many of these ports do I have exposed to the internet? But as Kombe, you ask, of course, we have got tools that can help you map out and list for you the different ports open on a specific device. One of that commonly used tool is Nmap. That's Nmap. So Nmap can help you if you have your switch, if you have your router, if you have your firewall, even from home, if you know your public IP address of your firewall, you can just run that tool, Nmap, and I'm just typing this on the chat. I hope that you can see the tool, the name of the tool, Nmap. You can just key in the IP address, and once you scan, you're able to see the ports that are open. If you find that a port 21 is open, then what that means is that that port is open to the public, to the internet, and it means that it's possible for attackers to try and brute force the different combinations. And if that FTP has sensitive data, that FTP server, FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. If the server hosting that service has critical data, it means is that it's now exposed to attackers. Now, the third port that you see up in the list here is port 3389, port RDP. Now, you possibly have heard of a lot of different, if you have done a bit of research on exploitation that are done over the internet and the different attacks we've had over this year and last year, we have a known vulnerability for RDP. We have a known vulnerability for RDP, which means that if you have this service open and you have this port open to the internet, it's very easy for an attacker to exploit that server and exploit the specific application that has been hosted on that server. So if you, I'm just posting something on chat. So when you have time, look at that. There's a common vulnerability that has been on the rise, targeting RDP called Bluekeep, and different vulnerabilities are normally tagged by what we call a CVE number, And the specific CVE number for this specific vulnerability that has been on the rise is called CVE 2019-0708. CVE 2019-0708. Now, what this means is if you have got a vulnerability management platform, if you have got a tool that helps you to scan for vulnerabilities in your environment, what you can do is you can go to the results of your vulnerability scanning tool and look at the results, see whether you have got any of your infrastructure, critical infrastructure, vulnerable to this specific vulnerability that targets RDP, which is Remote Desktop Protocol Service. Okay. So if you have got, depending on the specific vulnerability management platform that you have, this is something that you can do. You can also make use of different tools, like Nmap has got different scripts. Even after this webinar, those of you who might want to get this kind of information, feel free to reach out to us and we can guide you on how to validate whether your infrastructure is vulnerable to this specific vulnerability. But if you have RDP open out to the environment, it's like having the, if I may put it this way, if you, it's like having you have the, I don't know whether this analogy fits, but you have your gate open, and then you have the door to your living room open, and then you have your door to your bedroom open. So that's where you have sensitive data, and that's what attackers are looking for. Okay. I'll ask Brency to take note of that question on best free vulnerability scanners on the market. We will come back to that. I will let some of my colleagues respond to that. Then we have the fourth one, which is SMB port 445. So this has been, if you have port 445 open to the internet, this again is a top high risk from a technology side. Remember, we are looking at technology risks that have resulted from different technology adoptions during this COVID-19 period and even post-COVID-19 as we begin to open up following this period. So port 445 is used for file sharing. You might have heard of an attack called WannaCry. WannaCry. This was in 2017. I don't know how many of us were affected. Hopefully, none of us was affected. But WannaCry was a vulnerability that was targeting Windows system, and specifically, it exploits port 445, SMB. Now, is SMB a service that is required for you as an organization? Yes, it is. It's required for file sharing. If you have a domain in your network, then you need to share files. But again, the question is, now that we are working from home and you have your staff working from home, how have you exposed your infrastructure? Do you have a business system, a critical business system that is exposed to the internet? And actually, out of these 4 ports, from our analysis, 23 and 21, you'll find that gives you access. 23 will mostly give you access to perimeter. 21 will give you access to an FTP server, and that FTP server could host critical data. But then port 3389 and 445, if they are publicly open to the internet, these are high-risk ports. So if you have, again, a vulnerability scanner that you're running, please ensure that you do not have any ports 445, you do not have any ports 3389 open to the internet. Okay. What this means is that they should not be open to the internet. Your employees or your staff need to connect to their environment through VPN, say, and then once they connect to that environment, this kind of file sharing services should only be accessible from within your environment, but should not be accessible from outside your environment. Okay. I will proceed to the list of services that I had listed, and Telnet, just a recap of the different services we have looked at. Telnet sends all data in plain text. So if you have Telnet on your routers, your switches, your firewall, please ensure that you have these closed or you have these changed to port 22, which is Secure Shell, SSH. FTP, which we've said is File Transfer Protocol, this specific protocol, and you will find if you are a financial institution, you might need to send payment files to some of your third parties. And one of the ways you transfer these files is your vendor will ask you open or will tell you that we have this FTP server and we want you to send those payment files to this specific IP address. And once you drop them, we'll be able to process them. If those files are moving over the internet via FTP as a service, what that means is that it's possible for an attacker to intercept that communication and compromise the integrity of whatever files that are being shared through that tunnel. So the recommendation for this is switch from FTP and switch that to SFTP. SFTP stands for Secure File Transfer Protocol. Okay, so thank you for the feedback. As again focus on this specific FTP service, as we are talking about technology adoption, one of the trends that we are seeing again is we have a lot of organizations now looking at possible ways in which they can increase integrations. And with these integrations come certain risks. So one of the integrations that you find is FTP. You find you have a critical system within your environment, and you need to integrate that system with your vendor application. How do these two communicate? Traditionally was through protocols like FTP, drop a service, which is manual, drop a service, and then the other system will pick that file and process it. But currently, we have a lot of adoption for application programming interfaces, which you might have heard of that name, API. So API is an automated way in which that allows systems and applications to talk to each other. But if you, again, we have risks around that. So again, one of the things that we need to do, possibly from this webinar, is go back to your environment and ask yourself, what are the different integrations we have with vendors? What are the different integrations we have with third-party applications, and how secure are those? Do we have any of those integrations going through plain text protocols, FTP, port 23, HTTP, which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol? Do we have any of our applications communicating with third-party platforms through plain text protocols? If yes, then we need to come up with a way in which we can change those to a more secure protocol. Then lastly, as a recap, I also talked about RDP, which stands for Remote Desktop Protocol. And what we've said is what you need to do, you should never have RDP running within your environment exposed to the internet. So what you realize actually, and for those, if you have any network administrators in the session, you can just go check on your firewall and you find a lot of probes to those infrastructure, because we have a lot of automated scripts on the internet ran by attackers that immediately you publicly interface these ports to the internet, immediately automatically they begin to scan and trying to exploit those ports. Okay, so this is just a summary of the different the percentages of the different ports and exposure that we saw from our analysis. And as I'm winding up, the question is, what does this mean for us as an organization? Having looked at those technology adoptions and the trends that we are seeing from remote working, adoption of teleworking infrastructure, what does this mean for us as organizations? So from wherever we are joining from, an attacker can perform a number of malicious activity. once they have remote access control. And so we want to ensure that we have a level of visibility onto our environment to check and see, do we have anyone outside our network who is probing and seeing what kind of ports, vulnerabilities, or weaknesses our infrastructure is exposed to. So one of the things that attackers do is that they install malware on key system. So again, the question is, as we are working from home, for us who manage technology within our environment, let's say we have teams that are in audit team, IT audit, IT risk teams. The question is, how do we identify and ensure that all our critical systems are running endpoint security platforms to ensure that we do not have any attackers trying to exploit our key system. Now, antivirus is a baseline protection layer on endpoint. And for endpoint, you're talking at both for your critical system, the servers, and we are also talking about your endpoint, your users. So you have your staff now working from home. But the question is, every day, do your staff computers, do they receive an update from the antivirus? Do all your staff PCs who are working from home, do they have updated antivirus running on their PC? So again, these are some of the questions that we need to look at and ask ourselves, do we have this kind of visibility on our environment? Something else that they try to do is they try to disable critical processes such as antivirus. They try to initiate and approve fraudulent transactions. They try to clear logs, files, so that if you bring in a forensic expert, it becomes difficult for you to do a forensic investigation. Sorry, just a minute. So something else is that they try and disable security software. And security software could be an antivirus. We have got different systems that different organizations come with. We have antivirus, we have systems called enterprise detect and response. So again, depending on the specific endpoint protection system. Sorry, just a minute. Depending on the specific enterprise endpoint security software that you have, the question is, how do we ensure that we have visibility on whether our endpoints, all our endpoints, PCs and servers, have the most updated endpoint security systems? And then they also try and exfiltrate data from servers. This has been one of the advanced techniques in which attackers are trying to exfiltrate data. And if you have had a chance to look, you might have heard of what we call the MITRE attack framework. When you have time after this webinar, have a look at that. But MITRE is a framework that talks about all the different phases of how an attack happens. So for us who use technology, the question is has our technology been compromised by malware? Is it in the initial access? Is someone probing and trying to identify vulnerabilities on our technology? Or are we actually at a point whereby our technology has been exploited and someone is within our environment already? And again, the question is, if someone is within our environment, are we at a point whereby data is already being exfiltrated, leaving our network? So you might see that every day at 1 a.m., we have a connection, 5 connections, actually a connection that happens in an interval of 5 minutes between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. And if you check on your firewall, you see that this connection is connecting to a strange IP address. So that might be an indicator of data leaving your environment. So again, these are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves as an organization. But what we have looked at so far, we've looked at the trends from technology adoption all the way to what that means from an IT risk impact. And now this being the different ways in which attackers exploit environments, the question is, what do we do as an organization? So as I'm wrapping this up, I think this is my last slide. what we need to do is to ensure that we have technology visibility. So ensure that you have technology visibility. As a parting shot of our webinar today, the question is, what level of visibility do you have on your technology risk? Again, the question is the how to measure your technology risk. That becomes a discussion for another day. But depending on whatever policies that you have, frameworks that you have, IT audit, IT risk, this becomes a good opportunity and a good time to ensure that we have a way in which we can measure our technology risk. So I think this is a parting shot from our session, and my presentation on how do we ensure that we have visibility on our technology. And risk visibility in this case, as pointed out in this slide, is a quantitative measure that quantifies the synergistic effectiveness and risk reducing benefit of cybersecurity controls depending on how well the controls are implemented. So I know those are too many words, but what that means is that whether you are in IT, you are in IT audit, you are in IT risk, we all need to work as a team. And the question we are asking ourselves is, how well do we measure the technology risk? What controls do we have in our environment? And are these controls working? And how do we measure whether our controls are working? From a technology side, the working of the controls could be a firewall, could be an antivirus. And the question is, how do we measure whether these controls are working? If you have no controls, then this becomes a good starting point to start with. I want to pass it over to William and possibly Chris for questions. For comments before we respond to the questions.